Now, meanwhile, the hardest hits are yet to come. Those are the words of the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio as he justified the attacks on Iran, saying they knew that Israel was going to attack, and if the US didn't join in, it would be the US that suffered higher casualties as Iran inevitably hit back. That as the US and Israel continue to pound Iran with airstrikes, Donald Trump saying it's just at the start of a relentless campaign that could last more than a month. Those words backed up by the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who said the war will take some time. Well, we're going to analyse the latest for you now. Joining me here on set is Deputy Director of the European Council on Foreign Relations, Camille Lons. I know that you're also an expert on Gulf countries as well, so we'll talk about that a little bit later on. Let's talk about the European side first of all, though. I mean, so far, European countries largely trying anyway to keep out of the conflict. I mean, do you think that can continue?
I mean, it's not continuing, and we see already that there are repercussions very direct on European interest. There has been Cyprus being targeted, where there is an RAF base of the UK, and the French base in Abu Dhabi as well has been targeted. So it's going to be difficult for the Europeans to stay out of this, that's for sure. And they've already stepped up their narrative quite significantly. The E3 have met and expressed quite openly the idea that they could participate a bit more actively in what is happening. It's unclear what that would entail exactly, but they talk about defensive measures, and the UK already said that they would open their air bases for US for supporting the US strikes. For the others, it's still a bit unclear, but it's impacting European interests across the board, and even like beyond the Middle East. This is likely to have an impact also on the war in Ukraine, for example, which is a priority for Europeans in terms of the stock of ammunitions available that can be transferred to Ukraine by the US, or the impact of energy prices, both for Russia, but also for European interests. So it's having a much wider impact for Europeans, that's for sure.
Well, let's hear exactly what Keir Starmer had to say when he talked about this issue in the House of Commons in front of lawmakers yesterday.
Last night, a drone hit RAF Akrotiri in Cyprus. There were no casualties in this strike. Mr. Speaker, it is important for me to say that our bases in Cyprus are not being used by US bombers. It is very clear that the death of the Supreme Leader will not stop Iran from launching these strikes. In fact, their approach is becoming even more reckless and more dangerous to civilians. To be clear, the use of British bases is limited to the agreed defensive purposes. We are not joining the US and Israeli offensive strikes.
Keir Starmer speaking yesterday. I mean, it's very difficult, not just for the British, but for all European countries, isn't it, to know where to draw the line, to know how involved to get. Obviously, they want the US still on side, notably because of Ukraine, as you mentioned. We've just seen, in fact, Donald Trump gave an interview to the Sun newspaper this morning where he said the relationship, it's a shame that the relationship between the UK and US is not what it was. Again, perhaps showing that delicate position that European countries find themselves in.
Absolutely. And I think that this is also the reason why the European response at the moment is quite problematic, actually, because they are they're not denouncing very openly the US strikes on Iran, and the fact that this is actually by international law, this is violating the UN Charter. These strikes preemptively have been targeting Iran in the middle of a diplomatic negotiation that was going on between the US and Iran. This is not the first time that it happens. It was already the case also last year, and so for Europeans who've been claiming their support for international law, including on conflicts like Ukraine, it's going to be difficult to battle this idea that there is a double standards amongst Europeans. So, but at the same time, as you said, the relationship with the US is so important at the moment, and they are trying to keep Trump on board on also like other issues like Ukraine. And so the Europeans are, being a bit in that dilemma when it comes to their relationship with the US on that issue.
We also had yesterday the French President Emmanuel Macron announcing that France will increase its nuclear arsenal and for the first time also allow the temporary deployment of its nuclear-armed aircraft to allied countries. New strategy aimed at strengthening Europe's independence. Let's hear from Macron.
The world is hardening, and recent hours have once again demonstrated this. We must strengthen our nuclear deterrent in the face of multiple threats, and we must consider our deterrent strategy deep within the European continent.
Yeah, again, Macron there and other European countries very much trying to ensure that the overall security of European nations.
Yes, I mean, this is what is being discussed, and Macron is making a quite significant step in that direction. He's been talking about the broadening of the nuclear umbrella, if we can talk, or at least what is considered as the vital interest of France that fall under that nuclear umbrella, by making it European. And this is something that he already alluded to in his previous speech in 2020. So this is quite an interesting step, and it's interesting also to see that European countries are quite open to that, including the Germans that initially in 2020 were not so ready for that kind of conversation. But we see that the international context has evolved so fast since 2020 that now Europeans are interested by this. And we see that even in the case of the escalation of Iran, the international context around proliferation, nuclear risks is also building that kind of context in which the Macron speech is taking place.
I also mentioned at the top there, you're also an expert on the Gulf countries as well. I mean, those attacks that we've seen on those Gulf countries that have spilled out from this war in Iran, I mean, how surprising do you think they were in the first place? Because it does almost feel like people were rather taken aback by what happened.
I think they were taken aback by the scale that it took and the fact that it happened so quickly. Because the Iranians last year during the 12-day war took quite some time to respond. They were more hesitant. They didn't target Gulf countries because they on the contrary, they had invested quite a lot in the diplomacy with these countries. Saudi Arabia has normalized its relationship with Iran since 2023. And so they were using Gulf countries as kind of intermediate between Iran and the US. The problem is they realized that this could be a vulnerability for them as well. And so they want now to inflict as much cost as possible on U.S. interest, and this passes through these allies in the wider region. And their hope probably is to push these countries to pressure the U.S. to put a stop to the current escalation. But so it was expected that this was a high risk. This is the nightmare scenario for Gulf countries, and so we were expecting something of this sort. But the scale is quite unprecedented, especially for populations in the Gulf that have not been targeted directly for a very long period of time. And so this is very unusual for them to be suddenly targeted.
And how does it damage perhaps the relationship between those Gulf countries and the US and Israel as well?
So at the moment, it's quite difficult to know how this is going to push Gulf countries strategically, because their strategy so far in the recent years was to kind of have an intermediate position between their very close security relationship with the US, but also having their own channel, diplomatic channel with Iran, because they realized that they could not rely on the US for too much for their security umbrella. And so they decided to have this kind of double approach. The problem now is that they're losing on both fronts, because Iran, I mean, the diplomacy that they had with Iran is not shielding them anymore against those strikes. And on the other side, they know that the US is such an unreliable partner, and this is being confirmed even more by the recent escalation. I mean, they've been trying for months, lobbying in Washington, trying to push Washington not to escalate and to prioritize diplomacy, and they've not been heard by Trump. And so the outcome of this is that more than ever they cannot rely on that problematic partner.
I mean, it really has upended, hasn't it? The whole way that things have worked over the last few years, the whole diplomatic process between all these countries.
Yes, and it's opening, like we are now in a period of complete uncertainty. The big concern, including for Gulf states, is what is going to happen to the regime in Iran, because although they didn't like. I mean, it's a hostile regime. They never trusted the Iranian regime, that's for sure. But they prefer a hostile regime that they know than an enemy that they don't know. And at the moment, it's opening the door to any development in Iran. It's very unclear, what the transition is going to lead us to. If it leads also to a complete fragmentation and scrambling of the country, that could have also repercussions in terms of refugee flows. And in that case, the Gulf states are really in the front lines of that. So these are countries that really dislike chaos in general and uncertainty. And this is opening the door to a lot of uncertainty, including also the effect this is having already on energy prices and energy trade, which is very important for them.
And just briefly, I mean, what can you imagine is going on behind closed doors? I mean, an awful lot of conversations, presumably, trying to find a way out of this?
Between the Gulf states and the US?
Yeah.
I mean, the question now is, again, as I said, they don't know exactly how to position themselves, whether they should completely align now, because the risk is that they get forced to align completely with the US escalation. Some of them are talking about potentially opening their airspaces to support the current campaign, because until now they had closed their airspaces. They really wanted to stay out of the escalation. They might be forced to get into it now, but if they do, that would also probably trigger even more risks and risk of being targeted by the Iranians and their proxies. So they're a little bit in a difficult situation at the moment in terms of where to go.
Great to have you with us. Thanks very much for coming in and talking to us today. Camille Lons there, Deputy Director of the European Council on Foreign Relations. Thanks very much again.